Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to Bamboos 2020. We are coming towards almost the end of 1.5 days of different panel discussions, keynote sessions, workshops. So today is the last workshop of this annual Bamboos 2020. I hope all of you have been enjoying the different sessions and workshops, and of course the expo, which is running with the multiple sponsor products and services on demo, etc. So I would like to welcome you all for this final workshop of Bamboos 2020. Today we have the last workshop is an extremely important and a very, of course, often overlooked and mundane topic, I must say, but at the same time, it has very, very important implications on the general upkeep and maintenance of the apartment community itself, the complex itself, and of course, with the significant impact on cost, which you can leverage if given the focus on. So we are talking today about maintenance of plant and machinery in apartment complexes, critical installations, critical assets, which many lakhs of rupees have been spent at the time of installation or buying the apartment, but a lot of times will get overlooked and not observed or handed over to third party. Of course, third party people will play a very strong role, but I think it's a very important for members of the committee, a few individuals, owners in the apartment complex to have a very strong technical and executive ownership on these installations to make sure that they're running fine and any challenges and issues are can be preempted. So today we have as the anchor for this session our very own Mr. Luke Dhanraj. He is the president of our Bellandur cluster. But more importantly, I think why I reached out to him is for two reasons. One, I think Luke comes with a tremendous background and experience in the electrical industry. He worked for more than 22 years in Siemens in various capacities. Of course, Siemens is one of the premier companies in the world which does a lot of work in electrical installations, and so he knows the subject matter. He's also been now for the past few years, close to 7 years, been working as an environmental consultant specifically focused on water management in apartment complexes, commercial complexes, factories, etc. So he's very passionate about environmental sustainability as well. And more importantly, he's also been a practitioner as being has been the president of Shobha Quartz Owners Associations for about 3.5 years. So as in that role, I think he's been hands-on. He's practiced what he speaks and brought in a lot of technical focus and ownership on management and maintenance of critical installations. So I had no doubt but to reach out to Luke and say, hey, this is a very, very important area which our members need awareness to be built on. So can we put together a workshop which can be informative to people? So I thank Luke. Luke, thank you so much. I think for one agreeing to anchor this session workshop, as well as being a very critical member of our leadership team of BAF. As always, we are always feel very easy to reach out to you and seek your support. And over to you, sir, from here on.
Thanks, Vikram. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, wonderful introduction. Can I start now?
Yes, please.
Hi, all. I'm very happy to take this session on maintenance of plant and machinery in apartment complexes and layouts. When it comes to critical installations, I must say every installation in an apartment complex is really critical. So I have listed out, next please, listed out the various plant and machinery that we generally have in our apartment complexes. Every such plant is really very important. You would find that although the firefighting plant never is called upon to work generally, it is one of the most critical plants, and it needs to spring into action when there is, if at all, there is an incidence of fire. Likewise, the STP needs to work continuously 24/7, and so on and so forth. Every installation is critical to us. So I have although I have listed out all such plant and machinery, I want to selectively take up topics so that I can cover as much as practical in this about an hour or so that has been given to me. When it comes to maintenance, there can be probably two aspects. One is really breakdown maintenance, and the other is preventive maintenance. You would have observed that in the olden days of Ambassador and Fiat cars in India, I'm talking about 70s and 80s, one hardly had a choice, and the maintenance of these vehicles were really not really streamlined. The result, you would find every now and then a vehicle stranded here and there. But with the advent of the new cars, cars of better design and better preventive maintenance practices, you find that there is hardly any car that suffers breakdown on the road. What we need to thus target is to have preventive maintenance of all plant and machinery, so that we don't have any breakdown at all. And most important, both operation and maintenance, I would say preventive maintenance, go together hand in hand. Let us see how it is. Next. Manath, next. Uh, I gave some thought to what all kind of plants that we possibly have in apartment complexes. I came up with some 13 plants, which I have listed here, but I'll handle them one by one. The next. Uh, Pump motors, see here what I'm referring to are the sump pump motors, which are really very critical, as well as this also includes the borewell motors and all kinds of motors that pump water, uh, potable water, for distribution to apartment units. Now, these motors are mostly submersible motors, and their bearings are life lubricated. We don't really have to worry about the bearings, but there is a very important thing to be taken care of, because the motors keep burning out every now and then. That's the experience of most of our apartment complexes. The motors burn out on account of two important reasons. Number one, the electrician or plumber who is responsible for switching it on invariably forgets to switch off, and the motors run dry and burn out. Or these fellows go and sleep, if it's in the night duty, they go and sleep and the motors burn out. So there are two important things to be taken care of. Number one, never allow the motor to run dry. If the motor is sitting inside water, that is a lot of water around it, and that water gets also circulated over the surface of the motor, thus cooling the motor. Any electrical equipment, while carrying current, it gets a little bit warm or heated. That's because the winding or the other stuff in the equipment, while carrying current, there is a certain amount of heat generated there, equal to I square R being the resistance. And that heat appears as temperature on the surface of the motor. And if that heat is not cooled or removed, the motor will burn. Ultimately, it will reach a temperature beyond its permissible limits and it will burn. So it is important to ensure that the cooling activity is constantly present around it. And since these submersible motors are designed to be cooled by the water around, we should not run them dry. If the sump is emptied by the pump, then the pump should have been stopped. There can be several methods of doing it. One thing, the electrician can keep awake and monitor the level and switch off. Another thing, there are automatic level controllers, and these level controllers can be deployed so that the motor gets switched off. There is yet another important thing to be seen. As I mentioned to you, the motor gets warm and gets heated up. Invariably, these motors are required to be switched on and off by starters. And the starters have a relay called bimetal overload relay, which are built of two different metals, and a strip carrying the load current of the motor tends to bend in the event of current passing through it. And once a certain current, that is beyond a preset current, is passed through the relay, it trips the motor. This is a wonderful arrangement, and it's a wonderful protective device intended to more closely monitor the temperature of the motor and therefore protect it. But this relay needs to be set properly. I'll just explain to you how it needs to be set. You have a motor, you are able to read its full load current from the nameplate. Let's say a 15 HP pump, 15 HP motor. Its nameplate current, full load current could be about 21 ampere or so. Now, this 21 ampere needs to be set in the bimetal overload relay. And if you set the bimetal overload relay correctly, when the current exceeds 21 ampere, the relay will trip the motor gets protected. In fact, a still better method would be to set it at 21 ampere and keep reducing it slowly every 10 minutes, 15 minutes until it trips. Because the motor is not always fully loaded. The motor has been selected from a given set of ratings as standard ratings. And so if the motor manufacturer, if the pump manufacturer came up with a HP requirement of, let us say, 13 HP, at 13 HP, you don't have motors. So he selects a motor of 15 HP and builds that pump. In reality, this motor will not really need to take the entire full load current of 21 ampere, but would only possibly need 17 ampere or 18 ampere. So what is required is you keep slowly reducing the bimetal relay setting until it trips, which means that is the current at which it is running. Slightly increase it, slightly increase your setting and leave it at that, the motor is fully protected. This would be an ideal method of protecting the motor, come what may, but don't allow it to run dry. Next. The rainwater harvesting plant is a very important plant in the entire system. But then there are really no moving parts, there are no motors, nothing. But what is required is, as I said, preventive maintenance and operation both go hand in hand. So if you see the operation, the terrace needs to be maintained clean. There are two parts to rainwater harvesting plant. One is terrace, the other is runoff water, which you use for recharging the ground. So these two systems need to be maintained. If you see the terrace system, you need to maintain the terrace clean so that the water harvested from there is of acceptable potable quality. And in this system, there are also like first rain separators, which need to be opened out and the water drained once the monsoon is done. And then the next monsoon, with the first rains, possibly a lot of dust will come through with the terrace water, since a lot of dust would have been gathered during the preceding summer, and this needs to be first removed. Therefore, the first rain separator. So keep the first rain separator open so that the first 10 minutes of rains go down to the drain, and then close it. So then you are able to ensure that the subsequent water subsequently gathered is all of acceptable quality. There are also other things that need to be maintained in this, like pipes being supported by cradles or clamps in shafts. These need to be checked for rusting or otherwise, repaired. If leakages any, attend to leakages, and then paint steel parts, rustable parts periodically so as to maintain them properly. Similarly, the runoff system also needs to be cleaned. The stormwater drain needs to be kept clean. Plastic stuff or paper or leaves and other things that have gathered there can be removed so that they don't go and block anywhere. And the filter pit of each well that sits next to the well can also be, the filter pit can be cleaned so that any filtered dirt, if any blocking passage of water, can be removed. And by the same token, the ground as well as the garden around also need to be kept clean so that stuff from there do not go into the stormwater drain and block the passage. Next, please. Then we come to the water treatment plant in the system. Most of the plant and machinery in an apartment complex, a layout complex, either have to do with handling of water or supplying of power to not only these plants but also to the residents. So I have taken up first the water handling plants. The third in the water handling plant series is water treatment plant. In the water treatment plant, there isn't much to be maintained on day-to-day basis, but the resin tank needs to be, resin tank as well as the filter tanks need to be checked for rusting and painted appropriately periodically. The resin tank contains a lot of resin beads, which are responsible for removal of calcium and magnesium ions and replacing them by sodium ion. And resin beads do have a finite life. One needs to check and ensure that resins are replaced at the right time. Similarly, in the filter towers, there are there are generally two filter towers. One is sand filter and the other is activated carbon filter. Activated carbon filter, activated carbon has a life of only about 6 months. This can be replaced at the end of 6 months or more precisely determined by the result they produce. Activated carbon is expected to remove odor from water, and if the water that comes out of the activated carbon filter is odorous, one needs to replace the activated carbon in the filter. Likewise, the pressure sand filter, sand has to be replaced. In fact, sand, silex, quarter-inch, half-inch pebbles, all these need to be replaced, while larger pebbles like 1 inch, 1.5 inch can be cleaned and reused. Now, these pebbles, once you would be able to determine when to replace them by looking at the total suspended solids in the water. The output water, if it contains more TSS, then it's time to replace the media in these filter. Next, please. The next important plant is the RO plant in the kitchens. And some complexes, very few I have come across, do have an industrial type of RO plant supplying RO water to the entire complex. Now, I'm not going to treat the RO plant of such complexes. I would like to right now look at the RO plants that most of us have in our kitchens. Now, these need to be periodically serviced. Otherwise, the quality of water that we get, the potable water, may not be of acceptable quality. If we take a look at the requirement of servicing here, it's mostly the filters need to be replaced so that water is of acceptable quality. Next. Manat, next. The next is the sewage treatment plant. Like I said, all these plants need to work 24/7. Now, sewage treatment plant also needs to work 24/7. Now, what is generally required here is the both operation and maintenance need to be performed by skilled and trained people. And mostly these are professional companies that operate. In fact, they take up operation of the sewage treatment plants. In this, you would find that the STP has several motors. Some of them are oil lubricated. They are not life lubricated like the motors I mentioned. These oil lubricated motors are mostly used for raw water pumps or filter feed pumps, filter press pump, or the blowers, inlet and exhaust blowers. So these need to be periodically maintained, in fact, daily maintained, monitoring the oil level and making up the oil level if required. As for maintenance of STP, it's really a daily business. If the air diffusers, the aeration tank has fine pore diffusers giving out fine bubbles so as to ensure that that oxygen gets dispersed in water quickly. And if any is not working, it needs to be attended to. The diaphragm may need to be changed. Likewise, the other tanks have coarse bubble diffusers. They too need to be monitored on daily basis. In fact, hour-to-hour basis, the operator needs to constantly keep looking out to check if any diffuser is not working and ensure that it is immediately attended to. The two other important things to be maintained are sludge filter press, where the cloth may need to be replaced at appropriate time, and the filters, like I mentioned to you earlier, the two filters the media may need to be replaced depending on their performance. Time of replacement again needs to be determined on the basis of result produced by them. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Sewage treatment plant needs to produce a certain result, and this result is generally monitored by KSPCB. And in fact, every STP operator is supposed to provide a monthly test report to you for the apartment complexes, proving that the plant is operated well. Next, please. Then comes the firefighting plant. As I said in the beginning, the firefighting plant needs to spring into action, although we never want it to work. We never want to operate it. It needs to be absolutely quiet, but spring into action if there is a fire instance. There are again motors, pump motors, needing to be maintained, as I have already explained to you. And then there is a diesel pump. In the incidents of fire, mostly power gets disconnected so as to ensure that electrical wires and conduits do not conduct fire. The diesel pump needs to be maintained in a manner that I'll explain to you later when I come to DG sets. There are sprinklers, mostly in basement and then in individual apartment units. These sprinklers need to be checked periodically. It's necessarily destructive testing and then replaced. And it's a process that needs to be performed every quarter, or in fact every month. Certain aspects of checking the firefighting plant's readiness gets done every month, while certain aspects get done every quarter. There are hydrant boxes. These need to be checked at least once in a quarter while conducting fire exercise, and to verify, to check whether the water jet reaches from the ground level right up to the terrace. Now that is an important test for every quarter. This again needs to be maintained by skilled and trained people, and certification is an important activity here. There is a fire clearance certificate that needs to be obtained from the Fire Force Department of Karnataka that needs to be obtained every 2 years. For this, the firefighting plant service provider is responsible. He can help you obtain requisite certification. There will be, of course, some fees and other formalities required. Provisional certificate is generally issued to the builder even before he starts excavation for the foundation. Now, these are necessarily documents that need to be kept with the apartment complex, and every 2 years, this license needs to be removed. The requirement is the firefighting plant should remain charged always, which means water is under pressure. There are pressure gauges to monitor it. And in the event of anyone opening any valve anywhere in the system, you would have the entire plant springing into action. All pipelines as per specifications in the fire circuit need to be GI steel pipes, properly painted post office red, and of welded construction, since any other joint is not acceptable. Next. Swimming pool, I'm not going to spend much time on it. I think we have already spent half the time that was allotted to me. Swimming pool, the routine maintenance, I'm not going to deal with. The water needs to be of requisite quality, needs to be chlorinated, needs to be treated otherwise to ensure that water is clear and good and whatnot. These are generally tested by the estate manager every day and corrective measures taken. Filters, the same need for maintaining the filters to ensure that the water is of always acceptable quality. Most important thing of any of these filters, whether it is STP or WTP or swimming pool filtration plant, they need to be backwashed every day. Every time you use it, you need to backwash them. And be it WTP or STP, you are in any case using them every day, and it needs to be backwashed. Swimming pool, it will be good practice to backwash it every day as well. Next, please. Now let us go to the power supply arrangements. Power comes into the complex by the substation, the transformers. Every complex has a small transformer yard with 2, 3, 4, 5 or so number of transformers, generally of rating 500 kVA, and they are almost fit and forget transformers, but then there is work required. Mostly transformers are always loaded, although not necessarily fully loaded all the time. There are occasions when during the daily cycle, there are times when the transformers are least loaded. There are also times when the transformers are heavily loaded. That is still less than full loaded. Now this, on account of this cycle, the transformer becomes warm at times and relatively less cooler at times. But it's never cooler than the temperature is never less than the ambient temperature. It is always, so to say, warm. Now, as a result of this cycle, you see, if you know the construction of a transformer, there is a primary winding, there is a secondary winding, there is a steel core. The whole thing is kept inside an oil bath in a tank, in a steel tank. And the steel tank has a number of cooling systems. First, the oil is closest to the winding. So whatever heat is generated in the oil, in the winding, gets transferred to the oil. And once oil in the vicinity of the windings is warmed up, it starts traveling upwards, and then it returns through the radiators. You would be able to readily recognize the radiators in a transformer. All around the transformer, there are radiator pipes. And as this oil returns through the radiators, it gets cooled thanks to the air outside, ambient air outside, and convection of radiation of heat to the external atmosphere. Then you have cooler oil coming to the bottom of the transformer, which starts rising thanks to the entire circulation system that gets established purely by heat. There are no motors or nothing generally for this size of transformers, no motors. It's purely natural circulation and natural cooling. But then with this warmer and cooler cycle, the volume of oil inside the transformer increases and decreases. There is hardly any air inside. Now, as it increases, the top air pocket, the air escapes. There is a means for this air to escape. And then as the oil cools down, as the transformer cools down, external air comes in. Now, this is precisely where you have difficulty. When the external air comes in, external air is relatively moist, humid. Now, this humidity gets into the oil, and the dielectric strength of the oil reduces, which means it can produce an explosive accident of the transformer if the insulation resistance of the system reduces on account of moisture in the oil. Oil is a coolant here, but the oil is required to have a very important quality of high dielectric strength so that it's also an insulating material. Now, in order to ensure that this air that goes into the transformer does not contain moisture, there is a silica gel breather in each transformer, a breather through which alone air can go in or get out. Now, that breather is filled with silica gel, which absorbs the moisture when external air goes in and lets it out when internal air comes out, taking away some moisture from the silica gel and goes out. But in spite of all this, over a period of time, the silica gel in this container, this is usually a glass container, transparent container, which you are able to see with naked eye. You are able to establish whether the silica gel there is blue or pink in color, or any shade in between. Now, when it becomes pink, it means it can no longer accept moisture. It will no longer absorb moisture. So moist air will go into the transformer. When it is blue, it will completely remove the moisture so that only dry air will go into the transformer. We need to ensure that we maintain it such that it is always blue or a little less than blue, but definitely not pink. So as it tends to become pink, please replace it with new silica gel, blue silica gel, so that the transformer is protected. In fact, most of the silica gel dealers, traders, sell you reusable silica gel, which when it is pink, warm it slightly, it will become blue. That means it allows the moisture to escape and it becomes again dry. So this can be used and this can be maintained by the apartment's electrician himself. The next important thing that we need to note in transformer, the oil level needs to be maintained. The oil has a tendency to, over a long period of time, slowly evaporate and get out. Now, oil level can be monitored in the reserve tank. There is an oil level gauge, that is a glass tube in which you can make out you can appreciate the current oil level at any time. And if the oil level goes below the prescribed limit, you need to add oil. And this oil addition cannot be done by anybody. It needs to be done by a proper technician, because the oil that you buy in the market will contain moisture, and that moist oil cannot be put into the transformer, lest it reduces the insulation resistance value, and the safety of the transformer gets lost. So you need necessarily an oil filtration process, whereby what is meant is the oil filtration process removes the moisture as well as any sludge that accumulates at the bottom of the tank, thanks to dust in the atmosphere or anything else. Whatever sludge is gathered at the bottom of the transformer tank, the whole thing gets circulated through an oil filtration machine, which stops moisture as well as sludge. Then you get a proper, clean, good oil of requisite IR value, insulation resistance value, so that the transformer is again safe. Another important thing is, naturally, the terminals of the transformer need to be cleaned and properly tightened. About this, I'll talk to you a little later. The next. Power distribution system. You have a main switchboard, and then you have a lot of starters. You have a lot of equipment in the apartment complexes. The biggest enemy to any power distribution system is dust. In fact, the biggest enemies are dust, moisture, and vermin. Dust in a panel, as they accumulate, and as the external air becomes sometimes humid or otherwise, the combination of humidity and dust can create a path for electrical circuit, for live terminals to discharge through such a layer to earth, whereby it can create a fault and possibly a fire accident. So dust can never be allowed to settle down upon electrical devices like contactors, bimetal overload relays, starters, switches, or any of these power handling equipment. So they are all kept always in an enclosure, in a panel, and this enclosure should be shut completely, dust tight. In fact, these panels should be dust and vermin proof. What is vermin? A lizard, an insect, even sometimes snakes go in. Any of them going in will create a fault. So it is absolutely essential to ensure that they are dust and vermin proof, so as to ensure that nothing goes wrong there. Then there is another very important requirement. Every conceivable electrical equipment in an installation, whether it is in an STP or a WTP or a transformer yard or in your home, every device should be earthed. What is the purpose of earthing? What is earthing? A wire gets taken from the external housing of the device right up to an earth pit through a system of earth grid. Now, how does this work? If there is a fault inside the device, let's say an oven, electric oven, heating wire gets by chance connected to the body of the oven. If anybody touches the oven, the person can get electrocuted. Now, how do we prevent that? By earthing the external housing, what we ensure is, if there is an accidental touch of the contact of the live wire with the housing, it gets directly earthed, and the housing will no longer remain alive, but due to earthing, there will be a small fault current, which will ensure that the preceding circuit breaker trips, and the entire device is protected and people are also protected. Now, to ensure that this earthing system works, we need requisite number of earth pits, and there are several earth pits in each complex, and all these earth pits need to be monitored. The earth pit can be, effectiveness of the earth pit can be checked by measuring the earth resistance. Mostly in complexes like ours, one needs to think of an earth resistance of not exceeding 2 ohms or so, less than 2 ohms. So solidly conducting any fault current into the earth. Now, if it is not so, if the resistance increases, what needs to be done is improve the conductivity of the earth pit. How is it done? You can remove some of the material in the pit and replace it by, let's say, some carbon and salt, common salt, both mixed together, some graphite and common salt mixed together, and replacing, let's say, maybe 1 cubic foot of material from inside the earth pit. That should, and regularly water the earth pit so that the salt dissolves and produces requisite conductivity to the earth pit. Next, please. Next. Manat. The DG plant. It's again another very important plant. As I said, one of the 13 important plants. This again needs to be maintained by skilled and trained people. There are systematically some checks to be done, just like in automobiles. One, what is called A check. This is generally done by the electrician of the complex itself. Electrician himself can check for, it's a daily activity, can check the coolant level, can check the electrolyte level in the battery, can check the lube oil level, can run the DG set for 15 to 20 minutes and observe for any unusual noise, check for fuel leakage, coolant leakage, oil leakage, and if nothing is there, you need not worry, the DG set is fit for work. If there is any of these issues, call the service fellow, service provider. You should be able to address the issue. Then there are 4 other checks that need to be done by the service provider. B check, C check, D check, and E check. It's probably not very important that it needs to be understood in detail, but I'll just tell you, B check is done once in 6 months or 500 hours of operation, whichever earlier. Change oil filter. Of course, they will check everything that the A check is performed by the electrician. That A check also they perform. C check is performed once in 2 years or 1,500 operating hours, whichever earlier. Air filter is replaced, belt replaced, and observed for tapered clearance and tapered noise in the engine. D check, injector is checked, fuel injector, and E check, valves, injectors, head gasket, etc. are all checked thoroughly. If required, they'll be replaced. There is also generally an automation for DG sets for automatic starting and stopping, and also for engine monitoring. And these are best done by the authorized service provider. Different manufacturers could have moderately different processes, but this is how the DG set needs to be maintained. In the event of any automation failure, it's just like in computer or laptop. Either a card gets replaced or it's primarily identifying the fault and replacing the faulty card. Next. Solar power plant, I don't think it needs any elaborate discussion. Dust blocks sunlight from reaching the solar panels. So dust needs to be removed periodically, if required with some water, so that solar panels are clean and they are able to absorb the sunlight fully, since sunlight is the working fluid here, the power input here. So periodic cleaning is what is required. Next, please. And if there is any automation or contactor, etc., I have already explained to you elsewhere. So the same applies. Next. Manath, can you transport the next slide? All right, I'll take the lifts. Lifts are the next most important parts. Any lift manufacturer performs, or other service provider performs detailed monthly preventive maintenance work. Occasionally, in some apartment complexes where the specific lift is not used much, it can be once in 45 days. Otherwise, the process is every month, once a month, it needs to be looked at, thoroughly checked, and ensure that everything works. What are these? These are primarily safety devices. Manath, if you are there, can you transport to the next slide? Thanks. So these are maintained by skilled and trained people. Safety measures, this periodic, this monthly maintenance needs to address a few things. Number one, door switches need to be operational. Screen sensors, limit switches, uppermost limit and the lowermost limit. Auto rescue device, which needs to be operated by a backup battery, since that is required only when there is power failure. Brakes, brake lining, steel ropes that suspend the lift car. They are examined for visible wear and tear, equal tension of all the steel ropes that suspend the car. Clearance, another very important check is done to ensure that the steel rope is not heavily elongated, that is elongated beyond its yield point. So there is a factor of safety, and within the factor of safety, a couple of monitoring efforts are put in. Number one, the clearance between the bottom buffer and the traveling counterweight. It should never go untouched, but there should be a minimum clearance of 150 to 300 mm, so that we know that the steel rope has not reached the yield point. Diameter of the steel rope is yet another indicator. It is measured based on the original diameter. The minimum acceptable diameter at any time is specified, and they check for that. And if the diameter is less than that, the steel ropes, the entire rope system needs to be replaced. Generally, there is also, in the lifts of the past 10-15 years, there is another device called V3F, that is a speed encoder which monitors the operation of the lift. That's a safety check, and if required, that gets replaced. Then there are contactors and other things about which I have already mentioned to you. There should be no dust. It should be kept properly closed. And electronics are also, apart from V3F, other electronics. All these have a finite life of about 7 to 10 years. Today's situation, thanks to the rate of obsolescence of technology, any case, they go out of circulation in a period of 7 to 10 years, then they need to be replaced. The most important safety certification process in this is the clearance between the counterweight and the buffer is measured, and that is measured by the service provider and provided to you as a certificate, which is every time an electrical inspector comes to inspect, he calls for that information, that certificate. So that needs to be given since the electrical inspector inspects the installation generally annually. That certification is required every year. And now, last couple of years, there is a new additional practice for safety. The license for the lift needs to be renewed every 5 years. Initially, the builder gets license once he gets the lifts installed. That license is valid for 10 years. Upon expiry of 10 years, one needs to get these new renewal done, and that is done every 5 years. For this, the service provider needs to give you a form called C2 form, which he duly fills up based on the effort he has taken in his maintenance and other measures, which I mentioned to you. And that serves the purpose for the authority to renew the license issued to you. Next, please. Next. The general lighting in the common space, there is hardly any great maintenance effort required. But considering that LED lamps consume much less energy than the GLS or CFL lamps, it will be good to try and ensure replacing of as many of the common area lighting as practical by LED lamps, so as to ensure that the apartment complex is more financially more efficient. I think with that, I have come to the conclusion of my presentation. I think I have completed exactly in 1 hour on the dot. So I'll be very happy to answer questions if any.
Sir, should I close this?
No, let's see the chat window and see if there are questions. If there are questions, let us answer them. What about starting current? Somebody has asked. KP Jain has asked. Starting current, yes. Starting current for an AC induction motor is about 6 times as much as the full load current. But starter adequately takes care of it. The starter addresses it, and the bimetal overload relay does not trip in such short period of time when the starting current prevails. The next question, if the previous committee emptied the swimming pool due to COVID crisis, but did not restore it, what are the possible problems associated with no water in the pool? Well, whichever committee empties the pool, one needs to have some precautions, exercise some precautions. Generally, the swimming pool should not be kept dry for too long because it will tend to crack. If it is not cracked, just refill water, switch on the circulation system, filtration system. The water will be ready in a few days. Can we use the silica gel after heating it? Yes. Silica gel, mostly they are reusable. You can buy a reusable silica gel. If it's pink, remove it, replace it by blue silica gel. And the pink silica gel can be gently warmed, not heat it in a big way, but gently warmed until it becomes blue, and use it, reuse. If there is a checklist of these points you have shown, well, this I have already provided this presentation to BAF, and they'll be able to hoist it in their website. You will be able to take care of it. You will be able to access it. Somebody is thanking me for this. I appreciate. I'm very happy that it has been found useful. What is the approximate lifetime of lifts and DG sets after which they need replacement? DG sets, you see, they'll have a very long life because we don't use them much. We use them only when there is power failure. It's several years. You need not think about it right now until the service provider comes up with details as to why it needs to be replaced. I have generally not come across the need to replace DG set. Lifts, the electronics need to be replaced. As technology improves, advances, and we are able to take care of, address safety better with improved electronics, we can replace it. Generally, lift manufacturers say about 7 to 10 years for electronics. So whether you replace in 7 years or 10 years or 12 years, 15 years, it's left to you. But generally, after a certain period of time, replacement would not be available. Replacement of even parts would not be available. So one needs to necessarily go ahead and replace. Motors, gearboxes, they have a very long life. Gearbox can suffer wear and tear. At that time, you need to replace. Cars, lift cars don't really need replacement unless you want to change the look and feel of it. Unless you want to ensure that it looks modern and let's say meets with your taste, you don't have to replace it. So these are long-lasting items which you need to replace only based on developments and based on the advice of the service provider. If the motors are outside the tanks and still burn out, how do we deal with those? See, a motor should not really burn out if a bimetal relay is properly set. Whether it's inside the under the water or outside, they should not burn out. Okay. If it burns, it means either the bimetal relay was not set properly or the electrician slept. Electricians do sleep. It's very important to ensure that when they are working, they are awake and work. What about communication system, that is intercom? This is constant breakdown. Intercom is generally, yeah, okay, I have not covered that. If you have an exchange in your complex, you need to ensure that it is maintained properly. A service provider should be able to do an acceptable job. And on top of it, these are all electronic stuff today, and electronics can only be replaced, cannot be repaired by and large. Earthing pipes, if they have rusted, then you have to replace the pipe. KP Jain says our apartment earthing pipes have rusted after 10 years. How to handle the situation? Then you have to redig and replace the pipe. If the motors are outside the tanks, and still, I think I already covered it. Was it asked twice? Your presentation was quite informative and exhaustive. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate your appreciation. Thank you. Sir, you mentioned in detail about STP, submersible pump maintenance. Typically, what's the expected life? It's run properly. See, if run properly, most motors perform several years. Okay, I have seen in the industry motors that are 40, 50 years old. If it's maintained properly, it should not burn out. And even if it burns out, a motor can be rewound so that it becomes useful once again. And if the bearing fails, change the bearing. So a motor has a very long life, need not be replaced frequently. Pradeep Pai says thanks, thank you, sir. I appreciate your thanks. Sheetal says thanks, thank you. Very well presented. Left information about license renewal, very useful. Most of the time, we have motor problems like coils, winding issues every year, almost 5 of them. The root cause is only inadequate protection and the electrician and plumber sleeping at nights. They do that. I have often experienced this, and it becomes you relate the burning to them. You tell them if it doesn't burn, I'll give you an incentive, or if it burns, I'll deduct your salary. Say something. There has to be a disincentive for a crime. It's a crime to come to work and sleep. Thank you for this wonderful session. You have shared very useful information. Thank you. My question is installation of automatic rescue devices mandatory if we have DG backup? No, even if you don't have DG backup, uh, I I'm not sure whether it is mandatory. I'll check that, but it is useful to have, because what is done by this device is, if there is a power failure, the lift is automatically taken to either the next floor, nearest floor, or the ground floor, bottommost floor, so that and the doors open so that the occupants can come out of it. Okay, so that the occupants don't get stuck inside. So that is important. Very comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much for the detailed session. I think with that, I have covered all the questions. If there is still any question, please feel free to write down here. I'll will have 2 or 3 minutes more. Then if there is no further question, I'll close it. Manat?
Yeah, look, Matthew here from Jina Shalom.
Hi, Matthew.
Hi, this is a pretty good presentation that we're talking about because I'm a new managing committee secretary. I have no clue actually to run this maintenance, but I've been getting a lot of problems here and there, like swimming pool, motors, stuffs, and all, like failing at times. But because they always tell me like it is always burned out, sir. Coil has to be replaced, and we have to send it for winding and all. But I'm pretty surprised, like why it is failing, and you're saying it could be possibly because the electrician is sleeping on his job, and or the STP guys, so we get yearly we get a lot of maintenance issues like all these kind of burnouts happening or earthing problems happening. So is it due to the the preventative measures not being followed or the sleeping under duty? That's mostly the cause of these reasons.
For motor burnout, the two things that I mentioned are chiefly responsible. One,
Hmm.
the bimetal relay should be set properly. If it is set properly, in the event of overheating, it will trip. Protect the motor. When it trips, you have a warning. You have an early warning system. It's a lead indicator that there is something going wrong. You can check the motor and then restart. And if it keeps tripping, then the maximum you can set the bimetal relay is the full load current of the motor. Never more than that, even by 0.1 ampere or a fraction of an ampere or a fraction of the full load current. That is point number one. Point number two, if it runs dry, it will burn. So you need to definitely address this by the operators.
So how frequently are the motors supposed to run? Like is it before 2 hours or 3 hours continuously, or like how? But if you don't know, yeah.
All these motors are rated for continuous rating. Continuously they can run. Technically 24 by 7. But what is done is we have essential duplicate pumps. We can alternate them. Let's say one day, let's say half a dozen hours, one pump, another half a dozen hours, another pump. But it's generally not required to run so long. The maximum duration that is required is about 2, 3, 4 hours. And that should be possible without any difficulty for any motor.
Look, one last question, if you don't mind. So for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lift, the AMCs, normally there have been some kind of a conflict in the association saying about the OEM service provider.
Mhm. What is the conflict? Hello? Hello?
I think the audio disconnected. Let me just connect the person again. If you could just raise your hand again, I'm sorry. Was it Mr. SN Skanda?
No, one Mr. Matthew.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I'm back.
Yeah,
So yeah, the conflict is about the OEM service provider, which is Tyson Group. So the cost of the OEM provider is going higher year by year, year by
yeah,
year.
yeah.
So I think that is also the case with many other lifts. But now
Mhm.
the society pressure is saying, some of the people are saying, why don't we shift to a non-OEM provider and then let them maintain, because the cost is much lower in the
Uh, you
comprehensive
could
plans.
try that and give a feedback to the rest of us. See, the issue could be there are specific components and parts which are OEM specific, and the third party service provider will need to go to the OEM and procure it, and they do have a price for it. No,
Hmm.
you can't help it. Every organization has to exists in order to make some profit, and they do have a price, and that price could be more than what the third party service provider calculated. I don't know. So what I have found is such third party providers are unable to successfully maintain a given installation. In order to maintain, they still depend on the OEM, and the OEM can take them for a ride at times. So best thing is, let's say, use all your negotiating techniques or technology to screw for the best price and get it, and give it to the OEMs to do the job. That's my experience. Okay. But as I said in the beginning, to your question, try a third party and let me know. Give a feedback to the others also. It will be good.
But some people say that they'll do the criminal case against me if I changed from the OEM, under tremendous pressure on that.
Who are these people who threaten you?
Not a threat, it is laying saying that, okay, because a lift is considered as a critical component.
Hmm. Yeah.
So some people, they said, well, it's an apartment, a lot of high-fi people and all, because I'm just a new person into this.
In your complex.
Yeah, because see,
See,
because some parties, they believe that a lift the cost needs to be lowered, because the maintenance cost has to be
yeah,
lowered. That is, it's kind of a balance in between maintenance and all of those things. So these are
yeah,
the
see,
little struggles that I'm trying to find hard to understand. OEM
yeah,
is what we have recently negotiated to have zero hike this year.
hmm.
So,
Hmm.
which I, thankfully to my negotiation skills along with my team.
Yeah, every day in our life, we need to use our negotiation skills. Even with your wife, you have to use your negotiating skills.
Thanks.
It doesn't work otherwise.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Your suggestion is pretty good, and I will go with that.
every complex has people who find fault with the MC. The MC's work is a thankless job. It's a lot of hard work. Unfortunately, thankless job. A lot of people appreciate it, but there are people who don't appreciate. Can't help it. It's fact of life.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So
Thanks so much.
can I go to the next question?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks.
Uh, yeah, somebody has mentioned here as a feedback, Ramakrishnan. Some associations have suffered after shifting to third-party lift maintenance agencies. It is better to negotiate a deal well with the OEM whom you have. I agree fully that the lift should be maintained by OEM. Yes, sir. AMC cost is not only for service, but also markup on price. Yes, it is in spare parts, etc., etc. So, see, every organization is built in order to make some profit, and you can't help it. Somebody has written, Aditya has written, they pay peanuts, hence their staff is recovering costs by doing this. What is this? The electrician and plumber is it? They are paid peanuts, so they sleep and make us suffer. Is that what you are saying, Aditya? Okay. So, but then it goes without saying that we should pay at least the government specified minimum wages and get the best out of them. If they come to work, they are supposed to be on duty. Sleeping on duty is not acceptable for any reason whatsoever. Somebody has written, for STP, we hear that Kirloskar pumps are better and comes for longer life instead of submersible pump for collection tank. Yes, for collection tank, submersible pump is not the best indicated. You can keep pump outside. It's generally an oil lubricated, daily maintained pump. Yes. Nice comprehensive session. Some associations have suffered badly. I fully agree. Yes, sir. AMC cost. Yeah, all that I have covered. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I think that's the end of it.